On January 9, 2024, Veronika Kudyakova's eldest daughter received a message from her mother that would mark the beginning of a completely different story. It contained a geolocation and a short phrase that investigators would later analyze word by word. But until that moment, nothing about these January holidays seemed alarming. There was no indication that a simple trip to Moscow would end this way. Veronika Kudyakova, 41, had traveled from Vyazma to visit her 19-year-old daughter, who had been living in the capital for some time. Veronika herself had been divorced for years, raising 2 children on her own while working as a baker. Her life was steady, without sudden changes, modest and predictable. As her acquaintances would later say, that was exactly why she wanted a change, a chance to start something new. She and her daughter walked around Moscow, went to see the movie Surf, and spent time the way people usually do when trying to make up for a whole year during a few days off. From the outside, it looked like a perfectly normal family vacation. At some point, Veronika registered on a social app called Drug Vokrug. It wasn't exactly Tinder or Bumble. She wasn't looking for a fling, but for conversation, perhaps some attention, or maybe even something more serious. A man wrote to her, introducing himself as Nazar. An unusual name, short messages, a calm tone, nothing that would raise a red flag. Veronika replied, and the correspondence continued for several days. During this time, they developed that sense of light familiarity where a person no longer feels like a total stranger, even if you've never met them. On January 9th, he suggested a meeting in the Pervomaiskaya district in the evening. Veronika agreed. At that moment, she had no idea where this evening would truly lead her. Her daughter knew where her mother was going and didn't just know, she supported her. For the past few years, Veronika had lived exclusively for her 2 children, never allowing herself anything personal. This was her first date in a long time, and her daughter understood that perfectly. They agreed that Veronika would stay in touch, texting her whereabouts, what was happening, and if everything was okay. It was a standard agreement between a mother and her adult daughter when one goes to meet a stranger and the other stays home to wait. The roles had seemingly reversed. The daughter worried while the mother offered reassurances. That is how life works when a family is used to caring for one another. Towards evening, Veronika left. Residential blocks, standard high-rises, and courtyards that feel especially empty in winter. January grows dark early, and by 9 p.m., the streets are nearly deserted. She was heading to meet someone she only knew through an app. No last name, no exact address, and not even the certainty that he was who he claimed to be. All her information about him fit into a few screens of chat history, and that was enough for her to agree to the meeting. Veronika sent her daughter brief updates, the way people do when things are going fine and they just want to share the moment. First, she went to a store to buy groceries and some drinks. Then, he wanted to arrange an _quote _2 _. She wasn't complaining. On the contrary, she liked everything so far. The man seemed different from the others, which was evident in the tone of her messages. For someone who hadn't been on a date in a long time, it felt like the kind of evening where everything falls into place. One message became the key to this story. Veronika wrote that they had gone down into the basement of a high-rise on 9th Parkovaya Street. It sounds strange, but she described it more as an adventure, something unusual and unexpected. That's when she sent the geolocation to her daughter, a point on a map somewhere near 9th Parkovaya, without a specific address or house number, just a pin. Veronika didn't know the area at all. Being from Vyazma and visiting Moscow, all these courtyards, entrances, and passages looked the same to her. A foreign city, unfamiliar streets. She couldn't truly orient herself. The daughter saw these messages and, apparently, wasn't alarmed at the time. Her mother was in touch and writing in a good mood. There were no cries for help. It looked like just an evening, nothing more. Around 1 a.m., Veronika's phone went silent. It wasn't a _3 message, it was just silence. Messages stopped delivering. Calls wouldn't go through. The screen on the other end had seemingly gone dark. About 2 hours had passed between the last message and this silence. What exactly happened during those 2 hours in that basement on 9th Parkovaya was unknown to anyone at the time. Morning, January 10th. The daughter dialed her mother's number. Silence. Again and again. The phone didn't ring. It didn't even go to voicemail. It simply didn't answer. It was turned off. From that moment, everything changed for the daughter. She went to the police. Some sources say during the night, others say early morning. The difference was a few hours, but the essence was the same. She didn't wait and didn't convince herself that her mother had just stayed over with her suitor. She immediately filed a missing person report. The police reacted quickly, to their credit, and dispatched a search party. However, they immediately faced a major problem. The location was too vague to lead them to a specific spot. The group began a search, door to door, basement to basement. The blocks around 9th Parkovia consist of dozens of buildings, each with its own basements, utility rooms, and storage areas. They were essentially searching blindly, block by block. Veronica was not found. The search hit a dead end, while the daughter likely replayed every line of the correspondence in her head over and over again. She had let her mother go. She had agreed to stay in touch. She had read those messages and felt nothing alarming. And now a blank phone screen, police searching strangers' basements without results, and a realization growing clearer. Something had gone wrong, and she could do nothing about it. Until that moment, there was still hope that everything would be explained, that Veronica would get in touch, that her phone had simply died, and that the story would turn out to be frightening, but not a total tragedy. On Friday, January 12th, 2 days after the disappearance, that hope ended. The police had continued their rounds, and the daughter continued to wait. Veronica's phone remained silent. Then a signal came in. But it didn't come from the search party or from 9th Parkovia. It came from 16th Parkovia Street, near a construction site fence. Local residents noticed a construction sack, large, made of thick fabric, the kind typically used for debris. Inside was Veronica. What they discovered left no room for doubt. This was no accident. This was something else entirely. Her identity was established quickly. The police already had the daughter's report. The search had been ongoing for days, and the description, the time of disappearance, and the area all matched. The investigative committee opened a case, and a forensic team was dispatched to the scene. One of the key questions of the entire investigation was geography. The basement Veronica entered with Nazar was on 9th Parkovia. She was discovered on 16th Parkovia. Between these 2 points lies about a mile of residential blocks. This detail changed everything in understanding what happened. A construction sack, a construction site, a completely different address. Someone didn't just do what they did. They then moved Veronica in a bag past residential buildings, courtyards, and windows where people were sleeping. This suggested that the events were not spontaneous. Someone acted deliberately and systematically, understanding in advance how to hide the evidence. Investigators started with the basement, identifying the specific room on 9th Parkovia where Veronica had entered on the evening of January 9th. They inspected it, documented evidence, and then mapped the route from that point to where she was found. A mile. On foot, that's a 20-minute walk, significantly longer with a heavy load. By car, it's no more than 3 minutes. This led to the investigation's first major conclusion. Moving like that on foot without being noticed is nearly impossible, even at night. This meant a vehicle was likely involved. Parallel to this, investigators began a door-to-door canvass. A construction sack is a specific item. An average person doesn't just keep one at home. The logic was simple. If someone nearby was doing renovations, they might have such a bag. They checked, but residents gave similar answers. No one was doing renovations, no one saw anything. One local resident, Natalia Naumova, told NTV News directly, "Half the building is occupied by newcomers. People rent, work, and leave. You often don't know who lives behind the wall." This supported the theory that everything could have happened right there in that building, literally behind a wall. The investigation then took another path, seizing footage from every surveillance camera in the area, entrance cameras, store cameras. Somewhere in those recordings, the face of the person moving through those courtyards on the night of January 9th had to appear. But processing such a volume takes time, and there were no results yet. The information retrieved from Veronica's Drug Vokrug account yielded almost nothing useful. A few days of exchanging messages, a couple of agreements to meet, and nothing more that could lead investigators to a specific individual. While forensics worked on the camera footage, the investigation explored all possible versions. They checked building security and whether any resident could be involved. Perhaps she was moved from inside the building rather than from the street. At that stage, nothing was ruled out. Every lead was followed, every detail was recorded. The problem was that these theories were built purely on guesswork. There were no witnesses, no clues pointing in a single clear direction. The investigation seemed to have hit a wall, plenty of information, but zero answers. The facts were on the cameras. It was these recordings that would eventually move the case forward and provide the one thing missing: a specific face and a specific route. It took several days to process the footage, but when the picture finally came together, the investigation had its answer. A man walking through the courtyards near 9th Parkovaya on the evening of January 9th, first with a woman, then later without her. The cameras captured the route, the time, and his appearance. From there, it was a matter of technical work: databases, migration records, and registration checks. The identity was established fairly quickly. Shakhnazar Izhbayev, 35, a citizen of Uzbekistan. He had lived in Moscow for several years, working on construction sites. He turned out to be the Nazar from the app. Nazar is simply a short version of Shakhnazar. Veronica likely never realized she only knew half his name. The investigation now connected the scattered details into a single chain. The construction sack, the basement of a residential building. Builders have access to technical rooms. They have keys and know which doors are unlocked and which basements are empty at night. The construction site on 16th Parkovaya, a work area where such a person wouldn't raise any suspicion. Everything began to fall into a clear system. He wasn't in these places by chance. He knew them, he used them, and he understood how the district functioned from the inside, a side that regular residents simply don't see. However, there was one circumstance that derailed the investigation's immediate plans. Izhbayev was no longer in Moscow. In fact, he was no longer in Russia. On January 10th, literally the day after the incident in the basement, he passed through passport control at Vnukovo Airport. He boarded a plane and flew to Uzbekistan. If you look at the timeline, it becomes clear how tight the window was. While Veronica's daughter was filing the police report, he was likely already heading to the airport. While the search party was combing the basements on 9th Parkovaya, he was checking in for his flight. While someone was trying to call the turned-off phone, he was sitting in the departure lounge. 24 hours. That was enough to vanish from the country entirely. An arrest warrant would only be issued by January 15th, when the suspect's identity was finally confirmed. A 5-day head start. By then, Izhbayev was already back in his home country, beyond Russian jurisdiction. Whether the ticket was bought in advance is not reported by open sources, but the speed itself says a lot. Less than a day passed between the events in the basement and him boarding the plane. This doesn't look like panic or a last-minute escape. It looks like the flight was part of a plan that existed even before Veronica left her house for that date. Investigators began preparing an international request, but between Russia and Uzbekistan, there are coordination procedures and diplomatic channels. Such things aren't resolved quickly, and at that point, it was entirely unclear how long it would take or if it would be possible to bring Izhbayev back to face trial. By mid-January, the case had expanded far beyond a local incident. It hit the federal channels, and headlines appeared one after another. Basement date, construction sack, suspect fled the country. The story became the type of news people forward to each other. From that moment, the pressure on the investigation changed. Every day without a result was now in the public eye. The head of the investigative committee, Alexander Bastrikin, took the case under his personal control. When the head of the IC takes charge, it's a signal to the entire investigative team. Different resources, different attention, and different reports. Every step is now monitored. Yulia Ivanova, a senior official for the Moscow Investigative Committee, publicly confirmed the case was open and a medical examination had been ordered. The exact cause of what happened to Veronica was not officially named at that time. Forensics were working, but results remained confidential. There was another question journalists asked openly but never received an answer to. Was Veronica subjected to anything else before the final outcome? Was there something that night that went even beyond the scope of this case? There is still no answer in open sources. If the examination provided a result, it remained in the case files. Publicly, no one commented on this topic. The investigation remained silent, and journalists could only guess what the specialists found. Meanwhile, a very different process began online. People already knew enough: the date, the basement, the message to the daughter, the bag near the construction site, the flight from Vnukovo. This was enough for them to pass their own sentence, just not on the person they should have. As soon as the story hit the news feeds, thousands of comments appeared. Under every article in every Telegram channel, on every social network, the vast majority said the same thing. What normal woman goes on a date in a basement? It's her own fault. She shouldn't have met people online. 41 years old on a dating site. What was she expecting? She should have used her head. No sympathy, no anger toward the perpetrator. Only anger toward her. It was as if she had chosen this outcome, as if she knew in advance how the evening would end and went anyway. One of Veronica's acquaintances told journalists that she really liked dating sites and had a profile on every app. This quote was picked up by dozens of publications, presented not as a biographical detail but as a diagnosis, a ready-made explanation for everything that followed: dependency on attention, lack of discernment, naivety. They argued she came on her own, wrote to her daughter that everything was fine, sent the geolocation from the basement herself, and didn't even realize it was abnormal. The internet reached its verdict quickly and confidently. A gullible woman from a small town looking for love in the wrong places met a stranger through an app, followed him into a basement, and paid for her own foolishness. This version became the dominant one. It wasn't just in the investigation, but in people's minds. It was repeated so often that it began to seem like the only possible truth. Yet, in reality, it wasn't the truth. It was a convenient construct that allowed people to explain the event to themselves and feel safe. Because if it was her fault, then it wouldn't happen to them. Quote 15. That was the main trap of this version, and at that point, no one knew the true picture of that evening. While the internet was busy judging, those who knew Veronica, not from the headlines, began to speak. Their words sounded very different. Her relative, Ekaterina Dubova, said briefly, quote 16. She didn't explain or justify or argue with commenters. She just said who Veronica really was. A neighbor from Vyazma said something similar. She just wanted simple happiness. She turned out to be too trusting. Then, as if convincing herself, she added, "I can't believe she's gone." These words weren't an attempt to persuade anyone. It was the grief of people who had lost a real, living person they knew. Veronica worked as a baker, waking up early to knead dough and bake bread. She loved cooking, not as an Instagram hobby, but as part of daily life. She raised her daughters and didn't have any grandiose plans, just a normal life where the main dream was to have someone by her side. There was nothing funny or stupid about that. It was just human. She left behind 2 daughters, the eldest, whom she was visiting in Moscow, and the younger one who stayed in Vyazma. Between the flood of internet comments and the voices of those who knew Veronica personally, there was an abyss. People online discussed a woman they knew nothing about, passing judgment based on a headline. Meanwhile, those who knew the real her simply couldn't process that she was gone. But Veronica's loved ones weren't just grieving. At some point, some of them began to tell a different story, not about her trust or dating sites. They began to describe how things actually happened. Their version didn't match what the internet was discussing at all. Her acquaintances from Vyazma didn't argue in the comments. They went directly to journalists and said something that no one had uttered in the public space until then. Veronica was taken into that basement by force. She didn't go there voluntarily. She never would have. They were categorical. Quote 19. This sounded like a direct contradiction to everything discussed online. Not a naive woman on a basement date, but a woman who was led or dragged there. A completely different picture that changed everything. But a contradiction immediately arose that couldn't be ignored. Veronica had written to her daughter in her own words about the unusual evening and the basement. The tone of the messages was calm, no panic, no pleas for help. If she was truly forced, why did the messages sound that way? Her acquaintances didn't explain this gap directly, but their words implied two possibilities. Either Veronica was writing under pressure and trying not to show fear, or she sent those messages before she realized what was actually happening. When the situation still seemed unusual but not dangerous, the basement might have looked like a strange but harmless surprise, right up until the door closed behind her. Then, it was too late. Here, the viewer hears a version that flips the entire narrative. Not a foolish mistake, but a trap. Not a date, but an ambush. But for now, it was word against word. Acquaintances from Vyazma against the phone messages. For this to become fact rather than opinion, evidence was needed. And that evidence existed on the cameras. In the flood of news, this detail was barely noticed. The media mentioned it in passing. Local residents discovered it. No name, no details, no context. They just found it. But Veronica's acquaintances told much more, and their words finally allowed everyone to understand what really happened that night. The construction sack near the fence was spotted by a woman living in that building. She went into the yard, noticed something that hadn't been there before, and walked closer. Essentially, she interrupted something that wasn't finished. Veronica's acquaintances told journalists directly, quote, 21. When the snow started to melt, when the smell became too obvious, 2 or 3 months later, all that time, no one would have known where Veronica was. This detail changed everything because the bag near the fence wasn't the final destination. It was a midpoint. Whoever brought Veronica to 16th Parkovaya clearly didn't plan to leave her in plain sight of a residential building. A construction site means soil, machinery, and debris, a place where you can hide something so it's never found. That was likely the plan, to bury her, mask the site, and ensure no traces remained. But something went wrong. Someone appeared in the yard at the wrong moment. He dropped the bag and left, unable to finish what he started. Looking at the whole chain now, it wasn't a crime of passion, but a sequence. A basement accessed in advance, a bag prepared before the meeting, transportation to move her, a construction site chosen as a hiding spot, and a flight from Vnukovo the very next evening. Every stage was prepared, every step was a logical continuation. Only a random woman in the courtyard disrupted the plan. Veronica's acquaintances didn't just doubt the date version. They knew something that hadn't been in any news report. Either someone told them or they had seen it themselves. What they told quote, 23 journalists overturned the story from its foundation. The surveillance footage shows Izhbaev walking behind Veronica, not next to her, not holding her hand, behind her, stalking her, tracking her. And later, he walked that same route again in the opposite direction. But this time, he was alone, carrying a shovel. The cameras destroyed the internet's narrative. In the first pass, he is following the woman. In the second, he returns with the tool he intended to use to conceal what was left of her. After this, it became impossible to talk about a quote 24. This wasn't an evening that ended in tragedy, a flash of rage, or a domestic dispute. He followed her to the basement. He knew where he was leading her. He knew what he would do next. He knew in advance that he would need a shovel. Now, all of Veronica's messages to her daughter about an unusual evening and the geolocation are read quite differently. Most likely she wrote them before realizing the reality of the situation, or perhaps while understanding it but trying not to cause fear. We don't know for sure. But the cameras recorded what wasn't in the messages. He didn't invite her. He hunted her. Those who confidently wrote in the comments, quote, 26 didn't know any of this. They judged by the chat history, by the headlines, by their own sense that an adult woman should know better. But she may not have gone anywhere voluntarily. She was led. When the cameras put everything in its place, the chain looked less like a coincidence and more like an assembly. Element by element, step by step. The drug Vokrug app wasn't used for dating, but for selection. An invitation to meet in the evening looked harmless, but on the other end of that chat was a person who already knew how the evening would end. A woman from another city who doesn't know the area, doesn't know anyone nearby, and can't orient herself in the dark among identical courtyards. Perfect conditions for someone who knows exactly what he's going to do next. Veronica's acquaintances said a phrase that essentially ends any discussion. Quote 28. It doesn't matter that she texted her daughter and sent a geolocation. Against someone who prepared in advance, that isn't protection. It's an illusion of protection. Investigators sent an extradition request to Uzbekistan. The procedure exists, but it is complex and long. As of the latest publications, no information about Izhbayev's arrest has appeared in open sources. No confirmation, no denial, just silence. The case remains under the control of Bastrikin, but between _quote _29 and a _quote _30 years can pass, or nothing happens at all. Quote 31. A geolocation was attached. She sent a point on the map. She did everything she could. She stayed in touch, explained where she was and what was happening. The daughter did everything right, too. They agreed in advance, she monitored the messages, and when the connection broke, she didn't wait until morning. She went straight to the police. The police worked as well. They took the report, sent a search party, and started the rounds. Everyone in their place did what they were supposed to do. It still wasn't enough. The person acting that night followed a plan. He knew the district from the inside and knew that in a few hours he would be at the airport. He had thought through everything. Veronica had a message in her phone and a point on a map that proved too imprecise to save her. 41 years old, a baker from Vyazma, mother of 2 who wanted to start over. She sent her location and still it wasn't enough. According to available data, Shakhnazar Izhbayev is still in Uzbekistan. There is no information regarding his detention. To our viewers, today's topic was very serious. Such incidents have become increasingly frequent. We only call for vigilance and attention to yourselves. We strongly urge you, only schedule meetings in crowded public places. Let us know what you think about this video in the comments, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.